Good.
He was walking around Super Bowl 57 Media Week's Radio Row and spoke at the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference last month. He's the head of product for the football division at Pro Football Focus, and he joins us now. Steve Palazzolo, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Before we get started on Patriots and league chatter, I want to talk about data analytics. At the conference, you participated in a panel that discussed the keys and approaches to building an NFL roster. At PFF, what data and metrics do you use to make evaluations about teams and players overall? And can you provide some examples of how you've seen roster building change in the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that we use and that we supply to the NFL. But the first thing I'll say is the NFL is it's 32 different businesses, 32 different business models. So as far as what the teams use, it is legitimately unique across 32 different teams and what they like to focus on. Our role at PFF is to collect the data and to supply it to all those teams, and of course college teams as well. So we'll collect everything from our own player grades, which are production based, where we'll put positive and negative grades and neutral grades on players, on every single player on every play in NFL and college football games. So we'll supply that play level data to teams, but also basic points like run concepts and which route every receiver ran, and who the tackler was, who the primary coverage defender was. So there are literally hundreds of data points that we'll collect on a per play basis that then get just kind of thrown into the mix that teams are able to access and kind of find their own insights. I would say from our perspective, I think we have a pretty good feel at PFF for which data points are most valuable as far as projecting players. I think it depends across different positions. For instance, pass rush grade that we give to, say, edge defenders and defensive linemen overall is a pretty good consistent number from year to year, and it's an example of a number that is more consistent than a lot of the traditional numbers that are used for pass rushers, such as sack. So that's just always one of my cleanest examples. When you're evaluating players in the draft or in free agency or your own team and self scouting, the PFF pass rush grade or PFF win percentage, how often they win their pass rushes, both numbers far more predictive, far more consistent year to year than, say, sack totals or sack percentage, or sacks as a percentage of pass rushes, however you want to, display that number. So those are just a couple of the examples, but yeah, we're basically serving up hundreds of data points per play, and it's on the teams a lot of the times to figure out what they're going to do with all that data.
And these grades about how players are functioning, not necessarily the player grade, but what your second part to your answer, is that what makes you different from Amazon's next gen, or what, ESPN is giving every single week when they rate these players and, their top five players who performed for the week?
Yeah, I'd say next gen is. I think they use a lot of individual stats. Um, they will. I don't know if they're trying to roll that up into an overall grade, so to speak, the way we are. They might be. I think ESPN is similar, where it's like, here's this pass rush win percentage or run block win percentage. So it's kind of individual stats that they are creating using the NGS player tracking data from the NFL. From our standpoint, it's more of we watch every play specifically. We have a specific rubric for it, and we try to put it's a theoretically it's a subjective system where we're trying to put an objective grade on players, right? So it's subjective in that we've come up with a system and said, here's what a +1 grade looks like in our system. Here's what a plus zero point 0.5 grade looks like in our system. But it's objective, as in we try to treat each player in each situation as objectively as possible across the league. And they then roll that up into a 0 to 100 grade that you could break down by facet. So if you want to see an offensive lineman's run blocking grade versus his pass blocking grade versus his just overall grade, that's really how we do it. And so the grade it's a production grade that we're looking to show, which also differs from a team saying this guy he's a 6.8, in their grading scale, which is more of like, this guy's a starter, this guy's an elite player, this guy's a backup, whatever it might be. We're just trying to put a number on a player's contribution to production on a play-by-play level and rolling it up at a game or a season or career level.
Okay. I'll start with the curveball Patriots question about special teams. New England last week signed Denver punter Corliss Waitman to a contract. They re-signed long snapper Joe Cardano, who actually he was at the MIT Sloan Analytics conference, and kicker
Yeah.
Nick Folk is under contract for another year. That said, what special teams personnel options are there for New England in this draft?
Yeah, that is a curveball. I detest special teams, William. I don't like special teams whatsoever. So I don't put the time and effort at this point in the draft. It's usually, honestly, I have it. I know the kicker from Michigan is rumored to be going as early as day two, at least by round four. Um, those are always potential options. Here's the thing with special teams: predicting a kicker is very, very difficult. We know we talk about quarterback hit rate and miss rate and all that stuff. Kicker's worse, if even at the NFL level. So it really there's no I don't know that there's a clear path to being good other than kind of like taking some shots. And when you find the kicker that is consistent, that you feel good about, you roll with them. But even at the NFL level, anybody not named Justin Tucker has had some issues. Missed a few extra points here and there, gotten the yips here and there, gotten back on track, but then hit a lull. So it's really it's a challenging thing predicting kickers and just predicting special teams in general. I think the Patriots have done a really good job overall from a special teams perspective, and I think they'll probably get back on track and not have the kickoff returns and weird stuff that has happened. Don't forget, special teams did save them a game against the Jets last year with the Marcus Jones return. So I think they'll figure it out. But to be honest, I haven't looked too closely specifically at the draft players at those positions at this point.
And the best part is that if you do look at players' special teams, you can think of some perfect examples such as Roberto Aguayo or Blankenship, who both now don't have a job. So go figure that one.
Don't spend high picks on kickers, basically. Yes, do not do that. It's too risky.
Well, speaking of picks, Damian Harris left to sign a 1-year, $1 million deal with Buffalo. Last season, Ramondre Stevenson, he scored 6 offensive touchdowns off 1,040 rushing yards and 421 yards of receiving. New England also signed James Robinson to a 2-year contract. Do you believe that Ramondre Stevenson, he's close to hitting his ceiling in this style of offense? And that's not necessarily maybe a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, I like Ramondre Stevenson a lot. I think, when we talk a lot about just running back value in general, I think poor running backs, I don't think they appreciate the analytical moves across the NFL that have made their contracts a little bit lighter than other positions. But I think Stevenson is the exact example of why you don't spend high picks on running backs and why you don't spend a lot of money on running backs. Stevenson for us was the 12th most valuable running back in the NFL last year, and he was a 4th-round pick, in year 2. And I thought, it was awesome what he did as a pass catcher. I think he started to, as a guy that's 230 pounds and is built like a thumper. Caught the ball pretty effectively last year. Was a good all-around running back. Having the Patriots always like to have multiple options, right? They like to take a game plan oriented approach on a week-to-week basis. They like to have the depth at running back. It's James Robinson is a nice depth piece to have. I think Pierre Strong is a good big play potential 3rd option at running back at the moment. But I think Stevenson absolutely had an excellent year last year. Loved the way he runs. Was impressed with how he caught the ball, and I think again, very good find for the Patriots in the 4th round.
Well, staying on the offensive side of things, New England didn't necessarily address the offensive tackle position in free agency. Isaiah Wynn, he's still a free agent. And while Trent Brown is slated to return, he did allow 8 sacks and he committed 13 penalties last season. They signed some veterans such as Riley Reef. But right now, would you say that that's a big question mark and that is a worry, even if they do address it in the draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think if they had to start the season with Trent Brown and let's say Riley Reef is starting, they added Calvin Anderson as a swing tackle type, I think they can get by. I think they'd be fine. Knowing New England and their history, even when they have players under contract, they like to look a year ahead. They did that way back in 2011 when they drafted Nate Solder in the 1st round as a tackle. They already had 2 starters. But Matt Light was finishing up his career, and Solder essentially took over in 2012. They did a nice job of getting the need essentially a year early. You could argue though that the need is now with what, as you mentioned, Trent Brown. He's fine. He's not great. Riley Reef at this point in his career, he's fine. He's not great. So I could see the Patriots addressing tackle at number 14 overall, whether it's Paris Johnson from Ohio State, who could certainly be there at that point. I think he's probably the hottest name for New England. He could go earlier than that, but it's a tricky spot in the draft. I don't know if there's Broderick Jones from Georgia could be a solid option there. So there's a couple of those middle of the first round types of tackle options that I think the Patriots are going to look to at least have them as an option on their board. And that's, again, usually in line with how they like to operate as far as the team building goes.
Well, I mean, I wasn't really necessarily looking at I can't remember how Pro Football Focus, how they rated Cole Strange last season, but was that a surprise selection for you?
Yeah, massive surprise. He ended up, he had a slightly below average grade for us his first year at left guard. I thought there was definitely some things that he did well. He was solid in pass protection, so his actual rookie season was okay, I would say. But yeah, we thought of him as more of a third round type of player. It wasn't just us. I think the consensus draft board, which is an accumulation of various websites and essentially everywhere where you will find rankings consolidated into one. And the consensus boards are usually a pretty good indicator of player value. It doesn't always match what the NFL is going to do, but the NFL is also, one team picks Cole Strange and he's a first rounder when I think the rest of the league probably valued him as, a guy that gets picked in the 60s to pick 60 to 100, I would say, is where most teams probably valued Cole Strange, and the Patriots take him late first. So it was a big surprise. I completely agree. And I think, jury's still out, of course, on all of those, but so far he was fine as a rookie.
Well, this is a perfect transition to the draft. On a media call last week, ESPN draft analyst Mel Kiper said that cornerback is by far the deepest position in this draft, and there are between 30 and 35 corners that are capable of starting. Do you agree with all of that statement?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's 30 to 35. It's a pretty specific number for
I thought that was a little bit high.
Yeah, I mean, it capable of starting is, it's tough to completely define. There are 3 starting corners for teams now, so that might change things a little bit. But I'll say this: I think the PFF draft board, we have about 15 players or so first glance at the top 100. So that definitely, matches, I think, the perception there. In every year for cornerback, it's all about style and type. Receivers similar as well, right? Each team has their own specific scheme. They value different things in their outside corners versus their slot corners. So if you're looking for a big long, besides the top guys, if you're looking for a big long corner, there's a guy like Julius Brents from Kansas State, who's 6'3" with the longest arms, 34-inch arms, can play. He's got that press man type of build. You have a shorter guy, a smaller guy like Clark Phillips from Utah. I think a guy like Darius Rush from South Carolina is another press man sleeper type. So there's all these different sizes and shapes and types. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a very deep corner class, and it's all going to come down to how your specific team or how you as a team, what they value and what types of players they value.
So New England, obviously, they re-signed Jonathan Jones, and they have the Joneses, those cornerbacks. They also have Jalen Mills. Granted, he's a safety.
Stay downstairs. I'm on radio.
They have, in their conference, they're competing up against a Jalen Waddle, a Tyreek Hill. You're going to find a smaller receiver potentially in the Jets somewhere, but you do have your bigger receivers such as, Garrett Wilson and your Stephon Diggs. If you're New England and you're looking for a larger cornerback, who are you looking at?
My apologies there, by the way. I was supposed to be on mute. I had the wrong headset on.
No worries.
I got 4 kids running around here, so that's what happens. My 4-year-old promised me he would not come up. Sorry. So the question was who am I looking for? I'm sorry.
A bigger cornerback rather than, because on Tommy Curran's podcast, you talked about smaller corners to go up against, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill. But if you're looking to go up against an Allen Lazard, a Garrett Wilson, a Stephon Diggs, what corners are you looking at?
So I love Joey Porter Jr. as the long corner that can play press man and long arms and movement skills and everything you're looking for as far as press man goes. I think he's a good potential first round option for the Patriots. Again, it depends on what they're looking for. I think the Patriots of a few years ago, when they were playing a lot more man coverage, Joey Porter made a ton of sense as far as their prototype goes. The other bigger corners, I mentioned Darius Rush from South Carolina. PFF draft board has him at number 81. I think he's PFF draft board's kind of an accumulation of a lot of our opinions. Mostly Mike Renner's our draft expert, and he's putting the final number on players. I think Rush is a potential sleeper, especially as far as the size and movement skills goes. And again, the Kansas State guy, Julius Brents, who just comes out of the combine with just a body type that we haven't seen a whole lot of. Last year we had Tariq Woolen, who went to Seattle. He was 6'4" and ran in the 4.2s.
He did pretty well.
I mean, we literally had never seen somebody at that size and speed and change of direction. And then he was not that good in college. And then he goes out for Seattle and has an unbelievable rookie season. Julius Brents has a similar path. He doesn't have the same 40 time. He was 4.5, so it's a big difference from 4.28 or whatever Woolen was. But Brents has the longest arms I've seen in our PFF database. Really good change of direction, really good explosive combine numbers. So and really just long and tall and kind of a nuisance from a press coverage standpoint. So there are some intriguing bigger corners, I think, that would be that have potential in that day 2, even day 3 range.
Okay. On that same call, I asked Mel Kiper and this question. He didn't give me the best response. He went on a little bit of a tangent and he talked about different position groups that New England would look at in the first and second rounds. But I'll ask you this. New England, they signed 1 free agent linebacker. They re-signed 2 linebackers. Next season, 5 linebackers are free agents. How much would it surprise you if New England selects a linebacker in round 1 or 2? And who are players we should look at, with the exception of Georgia's Nolan Smith, who Mel mentioned?
Yeah, and I'll try not to go on a tangent like Mel would. I don't even consider Nolan Smith really a linebacker. Really, I mean, he's a pass rusher. He's an edge defender. I could see
outside
New England.
Linebacker.
Yeah, I mean, we group guys who rush the passer predominantly, whether they're the old school 3-4 backer or 4-3 defensive end. Lump those as edge defenders. Now, Nolan Smith would be a good Patriot. I think that'd be intriguing. If we're talking more true linebackers, a couple names that come to mind. Jack Campbell from Iowa, I absolutely love him.
And Belichick loves his Iowas.
Yeah, Belichick used to. I mean, the Patriots.
That's not anymore.
But they used to always like their 245 pound, 250 pound linebackers back in the day, right? When it was more of a run first type of league. Jack Campbell's kind of a throwback from a size standpoint, 6'4", 6'5", about 250 pounds, and moves pretty well. He had a 6'7" or so 3-cone, which is incredible. So I love Jack Campbell as kind of like a traditional old school throwback inside linebacker who could still play the modern game, I think, pretty well, as long as he's not in space too much against smaller running backs. Drew Sanders is the other name to watch from Arkansas, especially when you talk about Belichick and versatility. Sanders was an edge defender at Alabama, transferred to Arkansas last year, played a little bit more traditional off-ball linebacker, but Belichick loves his hybrids. Dante Hightower just retired. He was a linebacker by name, but would actually dabble as a true edge defender. That doesn't happen often across the NFL. Linebacker and edge defender are really 2 different roles, but Belichick's found a few guys that can do both. The Kyle Van Noys of the world, the Dante Hightowers of the world. I think Drew Sanders is one of those guys who is really intriguing. And one other name I'll throw out there that I love that I don't think Belichick will is Ivan Pace from Cincinnati. I think he's probably too undersized for traditional Patriots linebacker standards, but I just love him. Rushes the passer incredibly well. He was unblockable at the Senior Bowl during pass rush drills. He has the skill set for what Patriots linebackers are supposed to do, but he doesn't have the frame. So it'd be intriguing to see if Belichick might, break those rules to get a guy like Ivan Pace in there, because he's very athletic, fast, and the Patriots love to blitz their linebackers, and he's one of the best in the draft at doing that.
Well, switching from the draft and Patriots now to the whole league overall, it's a perfect day to have you on, because sure enough, Lamar Jackson, we see that he on March 2nd announced that he was seeking a trade from the Baltimore Ravens. This came out today. Obviously, Coach Harbaugh says that he expects Lamar to be, starting quarterback week 1. What do you think happens to Lamar, and how do you think that the Ravens will now approach the draft differently?
Oh, man, I don't know. Does anybody actually know? I mean, I didn't think we'd get to this point, to be honest. I really thought that the Ravens and Lamar Jackson would figure things out. I don't know if today's news was really news around the league. Lamar's claiming that, hey, he was asking for a trade back on March 2nd. He's been out there available for teams to make offers for weeks now, and we haven't seen the offers. I do think the way it plays out is post-draft, teams will start making an offer, right? With the non-exclusive franchise tag, you're talking about, potential 2 first-round picks here. I think teams that need quarterbacks would rather wait. And apologize, we're going to have a kid on a slide here in a second. They'd rather wait till after the draft. So a team like Atlanta that's picking at 8, they might be able to throw the offer sheet out there, 2 first-round picks, throw a contract at Lamar Jackson, see if Baltimore is going to match. And Atlanta would feel much more comfortable giving up their next 2 first-round picks rather than this year's number 8 overall. If things fell through with Aaron Rodgers for some reason, they could go that route. So for me, I think it's teams, even the Colts potentially, but for me, it's teams that are willing to make this offer maybe after the draft. And then they say, well, those future draft picks are going to be in the 20s. That's far less valuable than my pick right now at 8 or 13 or whatever it might be. As far as the Ravens, I mean, I think they have to play the draft with contingency, assuming they're not going to have a Lamar Jackson. So
do you think they play the draft, or do you think that they play the draft, or do you think that, and again, this is where players maybe kind of regret signing so quickly, but that someone like a Sam Darnold or a Jacoby Brissett would have been a perfect plug-in option for a year, and that, Carson Wentz now is like, I don't mind moving up from Washington to Baltimore.
It's going to be a tough one for Baltimore and their fans, though, if they went to any of those options, right? I mean, Jacoby Brissett, I think, is a fantastic high-end backup.
I've always been a fan of him.
Yeah, I mean, ever since that preseason game for New England, he had against the Giants, and it was kind of his showcase game, and he was excellent in that game. And then the Patriots ended up trading him that following week, I think, for Philip Dorsett. Brissett's he's a good option, but he's not the guy you're looking to make the playoffs with necessarily, or to make a playoff run. And I think that's the challenge for Baltimore, right? They have a playoff caliber roster. I think they've done an unbelievable job of managing, for the most part, roster spots 2 through 53. Right, the rest of their roster is very good. They could do better at receiver, maybe some other positions, but they may have screwed up quarterback. They may have waited too long with Lamar Jackson or whatever it may have been. So for Baltimore, I think they probably have to play the draft. They're picking in the 20s. It's going to be a challenge unless one of the top quarterbacks falls. Maybe they're in the Hendon Hooker sweepstakes, where it seems like Hendon Hooker from Tennessee, who's a lot of people's 5th best quarterback in the draft. Maybe he ends up going late first, as some people have projected. So yeah, it's a challenging spot for Baltimore because it's after a lot of QBs have signed and their options are dwindling here.
Do you think, though, that this is potentially a warning sign to the league, and now players or coaches and general managers and owners will look at this whole situation differently when determining and approaching how to communicate and how to determine contracts with players who are self-represented? You think of someone like a Richard Sherman, Lamar Jackson, DeAndre Hopkins. Yes, Bobby Wagner re-signed in Seattle, but those other 3 players, they wanted their money. They knew how to negotiate, and yes, they did get what they were looking for. But do you think now, and maybe I'm just looking for insight that maybe you have when you've spoken with those in the NFL community about how maybe teams, will approach different players based on if they're self-represented or not, and how difficult it is to work with them?
Yeah, I don't know if there's an actual trend or pattern with self-representation. I mean, we've seen
it's very small. I think it's only 17.
Yeah, and I know I've seen people, like, for instance, the Richard Sherman contract. Some people criticized Sherman and said, "Oh, you left a lot on the table there." And he's like, "No, man, I bet on myself and I got paid after I made my bet." And like, honestly, that concept is very team friendly. I do think the challenge is the agent is always the buffer, right? When you negotiate, you're going to say, "I don't want to give you that much because you're not good at X, Y, and Z," in simplest terms. So you're going to negotiate back and forth, and you're doing it directly with the player. You're saying you're not worth it because you're injury prone, or you're this, or you're that. So that back and forth is probably challenging. I'm oversimplifying, but that's certainly part of the challenge there. I think the other challenge, though, that I've heard a lot recently is players are just speaking up more, and they're just pushing back more, whether they're represented or not. Kyler Murray coming out and saying, "Pay me, Cardinals. I have the leverage. Pay me now. Don't wait." Lamar kind of holding off a little bit here. Dak held off till the final hour for Dallas. I think the players are just speaking up more. And then there's other situations. We've got Austin Eckler, ready. He's, asking to be traded by the Chargers, where I think from a team standpoint, he's on a great deal. From a player standpoint, he's underpaid. He probably feels underpaid, and he's speaking out. What I've heard more of is players who sign the team friendly deal, like the team won the negotiation, feels good about it, and players are saying, all right, not anymore, and so teams who look like they won maybe won too much at the negotiating table, and all of a sudden players are pushing back and saying, no, pay me what I'm worth. So I think that's one of the challenges that's happening around the league, is finding that balance between slightly overpaying what you would want just to keep the player happy enough, but also keeping it team friendly and trying to find that balance.
Okay. Well, overall, when you look at free agency, what was your favorite signing and what was your, per se, least favorite or questionable signing?
I mean, I cheat a little bit here too. I think the Lions overall, just a lot of what they did added up. And I think I like to look at free agency.
Even letting Jamal Williams go?
Yeah, even letting Jamal Williams go. I think Jamal Williams he scored a ton of touchdowns, which was the product of being a part of a good offense, and you replace him with David Montgomery. I'm perfectly fine with that. I think the way the Lions approached their entire secondary would be what I really loved. They got Cameron Sutton for about $11 million a year over a few years. They brought in Emmanuel Mosley coming off of an injury at a
great signing.
Buy low. Yeah, it's a buy low 1-year deal, but he's coming off the injury, but that's why you get that deal. And then Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, you get him on the cheap. And the reason why that's all good is they're all good players. The payoff could be incredible for essentially the price of one really expensive, say, edge defender. That's what they paid for those 3 players. And you also get to go into the draft without having to force a cornerback or force a specific position. So I think the Lions, that was just a huge win there overall. As far as questionable signings, though, one of the questionable ones that comes to mind was Andre Dillard, the left tackle, going to the Tennessee Titans. It wasn't a ton of money, but they paid him starter left tackle money for a guy that hasn't really proven it a whole lot. Former first-round pick, hasn't played a ton of football. He's been hurt, and it's just a projection to see if he's gonna be that guy going forward. So that was the one that stood out maybe as a bit of a questionable move, I'd say, by the Titans.
Yeah, one of the questionable, I guess, whole trends that I saw in free agency was why the tight end market was so dry. We see Dalton Schultz, he signs a 1-year deal with Houston 2 weeks after, or a week after free agency opens. I would have thought that he would have been one of the first to go. Mike Gesicki, he signs a 1-year deal with New England. Hayden Hurst, I don't know why he leaves Cincinnati to go to Carolina. Why do you think the tight end market overall was so dry?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's because, like, Dalton Schultz was a very productive tight end in Dallas, particularly
For one season.
And for one season when he had to be the option. But every time I'm asked about Cowboys team building, over the last couple of years, it was, okay, make Dalton Schultz your number 4 option, right? Get these really good receivers back. And when they had CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup, and then Dalton Schultz was the 4th receiver, kind of made sense. I think the tight end is just such a top-heavy position in the league right now, where there's a few game changers. There's Travis Kelce and there's Mark Andrews and Darren Waller when he's healthy, right? There's only a handful of those guys. George Kittle.
Same thing with Kittle.
Who are actual, they're coverage dictators. You can line them up all over the place, and you can run an offense through those guys. I'm not saying every other tight end is interchangeable. Like, there's some other guys in that top 8 that are good, solid tight ends, but there's a lot of, I would say, interchangeable type of tight ends who are going to run the same routes. They're not going to dictate coverage. They're not going to be a mismatch weapon. And honestly, all those guys that were available, Dalton Schultz, Mike Gesicki's kind of a pass game weapon, but he's got some run game deficiency, so he's not a great all-around player. Hayden Hurst, those guys are just system type tight ends. Austin Hooper, just system type of tight ends. The production will be there if they're schemed open, if you run a lot of play action and scheme them open. So I think that's it. I think the tight end position is just really top heavy around the league right now, and the league is essentially treating it as such, as from a market standpoint.
Yeah, and I mean, also when you look at the draft, did you think that what Carolina had to give up to Chicago was a little too much? Did you think? And the reason why is I was looking, there was an Instagram post that came up or something on social media about the Jared Goff trade and just comparing it, or the Jared Goff trade, specifically how much the Rams had to give up to get the number 1 pick. You think that Chicago, maybe instead of getting that 2nd round pick, it could have been a 5th round pick?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Chicago's pretty happy with their move. With Carolina, they're happy if they hit on the quarterback. You know, I mean, there's always, you could split hairs and say they
You said if there.
It's a big if. I mean, it's always an if. That's what you're doing. I think historically, if you look at it, the risk is always worth it if you hit. If you hit on the quarterback, the payoff is worth all the picks. If you don't need to draft a quarterback, the payoff for the Bears is worth it, right? They get all those, they get the extra draft picks, they get next year's first round. That's a great spot to be in. And they added DJ Moore, an actual player. The Bears had to spend all this money just to get to the salary cap floor. They get their number one wide receiver. To me, it was a huge win for the Bears, but not to the detriment of the Panthers. Just a win for the Bears because of their situation. And it's a win for the Panthers if they hit on their quarterback. If they don't, it doesn't really matter what they gave up because they're still back to square one. They need a quarterback.
Okay. Well, before we let you go here, there are two college players that I wanted to ask you about. Again, this is a college radio station, so there's no way I can talk about that. But Zay Flowers and Bijan Robinson, do they both go top 15, do we think?
Zay Flowers, I would say top 15 seems high for him from what I've seen. I don't know if the league's going to love this wide receiver class compared to others. He's competing with guys like Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnston and Jackson Smith and Jigba. The speed and deep element that that Zay Flowers brings to the table could be the one that separates him from those guys. You know, Quentin Johnston's a monster with deep speed. So I see Flowers being a late first type of player. So top 15 might be a little bit too high. Bijan's tough to peg. I think, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, yeah, absolutely going top 15. I think he's probably the best running back prospect we've seen in since Saquon Barkley and, before that, several years. Bijan's awesome, but it just comes down to running back value and the way the league values them. And there might be a team out there that's still willing to take running backs that high. But there's fewer and fewer teams that are willing to. So I think the market's going to be smaller for Bijan. And if a team actually goes and does it in the top 15, we'll see. I do see him going more like 15 to 30 though, than maybe top 15.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at New England, I don't think that they go with the Zay Flowers just because he's a smaller guy. New England does not need small people anymore. They got to grow, get bigger, get better. And then with regards to Bijan Robinson, you compare him to a Saquon Barkley, and I think of these two dynamic power backs. But I also think of two dynamic power backs that aren't currently employed. I think of Leonard Fournette, who is drafted high, and of Ezekiel Elliott, and and Todd Gurley as well. Granted, Todd Gurley retired, but someone like that, and you really hope that Saquon and Bijan don't end up in the next 3 to 4 years in a similar situation.
Yeah, I think that just shows the risk of drafting the running backs, right? There's a lot of tread on the tires after just 4 or 5 years. It's tough to sustain success. Todd Gurley was a quote MVP candidate in 2018, and I only put that in quotes because I thought it was much like the Jamal Williams thing. When you're a part of a really good offense, you're going to score a lot of touchdowns. You're going to look really good. I think that was a big part of Todd Gurley's success. The running back, it's just tough because it's the most interchangeable position in football. Doesn't mean it's not valuable at all. It's just the most interchangeable, and the position where we've seen success is driven by factors other than talent. And so questioning Bijan Robinson's talent, absolutely not. Not doing that. Dude's awesome. I think he can run any scheme. He can catch the ball. He can do a lot. But again, his success is going to be dictated by other things, and there's probably other positions that teams should be focused on rather than grabbing the next generational running back.
Alrighty. Well, the NFL draft is April 27th through 29th from Kansas City. If you're interested, you can follow him on Twitter at PFF_Steve. Steve Palazzolo, thank you for joining the program today.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks for having me.